Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about, finally, the new album from Aphex Twin, titled Syro. I've written in the past that it's hard to talk about legends, especially legends that have come to shape so much of modern music to the points where some critics describe revisiting some of their old classics as vintage. And for me personally, it's even harder when that genre is electronica, a musical genre that I'm only beginning to really peel into with any significant way outside of very specific offshoots like trance that I'm more familiar with. To go back to the source of some of it, it's more a little bit intimidating, especially if you got the uneasy feeling that a mob with pitchforks and torches will set you on fire if you don't throw out some degree of critical acclaim, or at least have really good reasons for backing up your points. So on that oh-so-comforting note, Aphex Twin. The stage name of the man with three names, Richard David James, used the Aphex Twin moniker amongst several others. His first release was a compilation of ambient mixes he had recorded from 85 to 92. And surprise, surprise, it's excellent. Even though on that album you could come to hear so many of the sounds that would come to dominate so much of modern music, Aphex Twin had two great advantages. Good melody, great melodies, and even better texture, taking sounds that might be considered vintage now and still crafting memorable and potent songs. And yet with Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, some of that texture evaporated into a set of sparse, underweight, and frankly underwritten melodies that lacked presence even for good ambient music and went on for a good 90 minutes longer than it probably should have, even though I will admit it did get a fair bit better in the second half of the album. Fortunately, a lot of that texture came back for 1995's I Care Because You Do, and especially for the spiky yet beautifully melodic 1996 Richard D. James album, a record that even today has a decidedly unique sound with a blend of strings, slightly off-kilter synth tones, and drill-like percussion, and it has held up as an incredibly good album, even today. Then came 2001's Drugs, and here's the thing, I'd argue about half of that double album works incredibly well. Experimental, drill and bass inspired production, it holds up as innovative in even today, and there are some phenomenal melodies that are utilized across that album that I really love, but there are also more tracks that go on longer than they really should, and the harpsichord interludes, they really started wearing out some of their welcome. And from there, James decided to take a long break from using the Aphex Twin moniker at all, until a Kickstarter campaign to reclaim the old, unreleased Caustic Window from a record collector that showed a great deal of popular interest still in Aphex Twin's work. And to some extent, that catalyzing incident is very important. It was indicative of what might be on this album. We probably weren't going to be getting the insane, eclectic experimentation, but more of a piece that was sure to be a crowd pleaser for longtime Aphex Twin fans and some critics in that regard. So, did we get that? Well, from the critical response from Aphex Twin fans and critics alike, they all got pretty much exactly what they wanted. But for me, look guys, I've been sitting on this review for probably a month now, and after so many listens to this album, my ultimate conclusion on this record is that it definitely is good, but I don't love Syro or think it's all that incredible. And really that opinion has come from a lot of listens, because this album is definitely a grower, and after the first 4 or 5 listens, I still had definitely not warmed to this album. At this point, I'll definitely acknowledge it as a pleasant listen, but beyond that, and especially compared to the high points from James's earlier releases, Syro doesn't really grip me, and I spent the past month trying to figure out why. So okay, let's start with what I've always loved about Aphex Twin, mix balance and production. James still has a knack for creating these deep, layered mixes with so many interweaving elements on an organic tableau, and his knack for textured percussion is second to none. And it's not just the texture, but the variety in the drum machines, from the thicker, African-inspired progression on 4-bit 9D, API plus E+6, to the heavier hi-hats in spiky line and circlant 14. There's a few great beat change-ups. In terms of transitions, Aphex Twin has a knack for some of the most gradual, incremental shifts across this album. Shifts you might barely even notice until they happen. And while I do miss some of the shifts that had landed with more of a definitive emotional high or crash, I can appreciate the intricacy of the construction here. In fact, if we were looking for a good solid word to describe this album, it would be gradual. There's no sudden moves, no real surprises, no out of nowhere smashes or breaks. This is an album that flows with a lot of poise and very precise control, and yet the production is so good and so organic you hardly notice it. And going beyond that, Aphex Twin puts a lot of his skills in ambient music to good use in crafting the backgrounds in these tracks with very startling detail, not just in mixed depth, but in interweaving with the primary melodies and beats. The opening track, Mini Pop 67, has shown some of this, but the real highlights are the scintillating Xmas Eve T10, then we with chimes, the great groove-driven Product 29, and there's this gorgeous high synth tone manages to handle some genuinely unsettling transitions very well. The atmospheric, sinister growls at the back of Cyclone 6A that balance incredibly well against the shifting melody line, and especially on the title track, Syro U473T8 plus E, which has easily my favorite melodies on this album, with these great interplay between these shimmering background tones and the static punctuated lines at the front. Aphex Twin even dabbles a little bit in drum and bass on this album, with tracks like Pat 4 and the more industrial leading S950TX16 Wazzer 10, the latter having this really great, almost gothic background I really dug. And that quiet moment on ASAT Sana, a slow burn piano piece at the end of the album, it was a nice callback to those beautiful interludes on previous records that I really did love. But you know what? Then I started thinking, I really loved a lot of these backing tableaus that built up these tracks and gave them a really phenomenal atmosphere, the stuff of which Aphex Twin has been exceptionally strong for years now, so why isn't this album really clicking with me? Well, for as much of melodic interplay and solid percussion as there is on this album, it seems like at every moment where Aphex Twin was looking to add new flavor here, it rings as a real miscalculation. The most immediately noticeable is some of the vocal snippets. For as methodically constructed as these songs are, to overlay vocals that are chopped into something vaguely harmonic doesn't really add to some of these tracks as it does detract from them. James reportedly had whole vocal tracks recorded that went unused, and the more I listened to every pitch shifted or chopped up moment, I completely got why. And it's not just the vocals though, but some of the synth tones as well, whether or not they're flat and blaring like a bee buzzing in your ear on Circlant 14, or incredibly cheap sounding like on Product 29, or at worst like these wet, gurgling farts on songs like Circlant 6A. The absolute worst tracks on this album though is when the poor choice of synth tones combines with a real lack of melodic ideas, like on 180 dB, where the clashing fuzz and blaring synths are combined with a progression that barely changes or evolves, even despite its aggression, or the stretched vocal sample that bleeds into this incredibly flat and cheap sounding melody on FZ Pseudo Time Stretch plus E plus 3. It feels more like a song fragment than anything else. It's these elements that contribute to the really odd mood I get from listening to this album, because outside of the title track or Xmas Eve T10, I don't really get a sense of drama or thrill or groove or even that quiet brilliance that highlighted James's best ambient pieces. The incremental, sometimes discordant shifts come across as slight twinges of discomfort, moments to feel that make the listener feel slightly at unease, and yet without the payoff of these moments or the raw experimentation to make up for that, it doesn't really work for me. It's why, despite as much I like ASAT Sana, I get why some people would probably see it as anticlimactic even. So in the end, you know, I'm really conflicted with this album, which is odd considering how much I really did like it, and part of it is inevitably tied to expectation. For a producer who has such a reputation for not just fantastic production, but pushing experimentation in electronic music even further, to see him return to something of a comfort zone despite the expansion of musical technology or the electronic scene around him, it's a little bewildering to me. And while I can definitely see this record satisfying the majority of Aphex Twin fans, I get the feeling that it'll ring as almost more challenging to those expecting more immediacy to the album's brand of experimentation. And you know, I include myself in that group. It's a more subtle record for sure, but that being said, when that subtlety doesn't land as much of a payoff as potent or as interesting or emotionally gripping as just impressive craftsmanship, it doesn't really resonate with me as well or as effectively. So, in other words, all this comes back to the fact that I do like this album. Let me stress this, but I don't love it. For me, it's a solid 7 out of 10 and a recommendation if you're a fan of IDM and want to see one of the masters return to his natural wheelhouse with an album that's not quite safe, but definitely not dangerous. If you're looking for the experimentation, you're not exactly going to get it here, but then again, most of you have probably already heard this record anyway, so you know what to look for. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, and be more than grateful. And the rest of you guys feeling conflicted about this album, I'd be happy to see your opinions in the comments, because this one really bugged the hell out of me. If there's any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at as well, or anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.